Okay, so welcome everybody. We've hit the top of the hour, so let's get started. Bring myself on screen, work out the tech. Thank you everybody for joining. Though the observant amongst you would have noticed on the slide that I've just stopped sharing, the Manuka names. I was going to start by clarifying you are in the right place. This is the insurance webinar hosted by formerly known as Sinver TCM, now to be known as Manuka AI. We are going through a rebrand. I won't labour the point, but yeah, we're really pleased you're joining us. So this is Manuka AI's first webinar that we're hosting. We're really excited about the panelists that are joining us. I will let them introduce themselves. We'll kind of go through one in a second, but the focus of today's webinar is really about exploring the opportunity that data and AI presents within insurance. There's a lot of conversation around AI. We know that, right? ChatGPT exploded. The conversation's evolved. Agentic AI is on the scene, but what does it really mean for insurance firms? And we want to dig below that and some key topics and questions today. So we'll run through. We've got an hour together. We're going to have some really kind of decent conversation with people that are at the forefront of insurance and have been really involved to give their views. At the end, I'm going to give a little talk on what's coming next. And we have an exciting opportunity around how we can do more hands-on collaboration with people that want to join us, but I'll touch on that at the end. I think now's a great time to bring on the panelists and let them introduce themselves. So I suggest we bring everybody onto the screen, and then you can all individually pass the baton around as you introduce yourselves. So Elliot from C-Quence, Gareth from Manuka, Fifi at Crown of the Straits, previously Direct Line Group, and Martin from Clyde Co. Welcome. Thank you very much. Gareth, let's just do a Manuka follow-on. I'll let you introduce yourself, and then if you could pass the baton to someone else to introduce themselves after, that would be fantastic.
Sure, yeah, thanks, Tom. So I'm Gareth. I'm the CEO of Manuka AI, formerly Sinver TCM. Really excited to join the panel today. Don't have an insurance background, so I'm coming in a bit more from the AI angle, but I'll try to share my my sort of knowledge and insights and opinions on the matter anyway. So yeah, guys, nice to be here. Thanks, Tom. I'll pass on to Elliot.
Great, thanks, Gareth. Yes, so I'm Elliot Biggs. I'm the CIO, COO of C-Quence. We are a commercial insurance MGA. I've been working in technology roles for over 20 years now, primarily in insurance, but in financial services for over those 20 years. In my insurance career, it's been a real mix of personal lines insurance and more latterly commercial lines. And at C-Quence, over the last 7 years, we've been building out our own technology ecosystem, looking to really reinvent how commercial insurance is traded in the mid-market. And I guess we'll get into some of the specifics of that as we go through the question, but great to be here. Thanks for inviting me. I'll hand over to Fifi.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Fifi Arthur. Currently, I work at the Crown Estate as lead data scientist, but prior to that, I've spent about 12 years within just general data science and AI. And I've spent some time working for the likes of Direct Line Group and Zigos and InsurTech. So primarily, my roles involve leading data science teams to develop and deploy data science and AI solutions embedded within the ecosystem within insurance. So it could be from pricing to claims to operation, and also working with underwriting. So I've actually had first-hand experience of building this model and deploying it. I guess Gen AI is a new thing on the block, and then people are trying to figure out how to do it, and we'll learn a bit more about that as we go on the conversation today. So I'll hand over to Martin.
Good afternoon, everyone. Martin Stockdale. I've recently joined Clyde Co as a partner, and I'm leading on the global innovation in respect of strategy and delivery. 25 years in legal and insurance. I say that I came out of law school, did a year in insurance before becoming a solicitor working for and in the insurance sector.
Super. Thanks everybody. So now we've got everybody lined up. We know who's here. I suggest we just dive straight in. I'm gonna pick on you, Elliot, to start with. I think given someone who's at the forefront of driving change in insurance, and you said, at C-Quence you're really ploughing ahead to kind of differentiate and make waves in the market. I think let's just start where the crux of it is. Like, what I guess the question about why did C-Quence choose the business model? Why was the business started? And what's the opportunity, and where do you see that opportunity coming from a data and AI perspective? How are you differentiating moving forward?
Yeah.
I realize that's an encompassing big question, but I think it taps into the core of what we're trying to achieve in this discussion.
Absolutely. I mean, I think in terms of the genesis of C-Quence, anyone that's worked in or been around the commercial insurance market will recognize that it's not been the most innovative and progressive market in terms of use of technology over the years. And I think, again, anyone that's had any experience of it would acknowledge that there's a great deal of inefficiency that's inherent in that market. There's a lot of manual handling. There's a lot of manual exchange of data. There's a lot of manual processing of data, a lot of repetitious actions. And really, if I was to summarize, C-Quence was set up to try and tackle some of those challenges and really approach those problems, but using data and technology to solve those. And I think what we've seen is a massive opportunity to not only challenge the status quo of how things are done in the market. So really asking the question, why are things done like that? Does it need to be done like that? Where did that come from? And does it really stack up today? But then when we get to the crux of those things that need to be solved, saying, well, how can technology and data be used? And obviously AI being a part of that, how can it be used to solve some of those problems and generate efficiencies, or generate better underwriting outcomes, or generate better broker and client outcomes? And I think what we've been able to demonstrate over our trading career is that there is real value in bringing some of those technologies and techniques to bear. And we've been able to demonstrate great underwriting results, great broker advocacy, great customer service as a result of bringing together a combination of good data, well-structured data, great technology, and being progressive in our thinking in terms of how AI can solve some of the problems that the industry is facing.
And I guess kind of building on that, like, what are there specific opportunities you're seeing for improvements in data and AI to drive benefit and give you an advantage in your business?
Yeah, I mean, I think the opportunities are really, really wide ranging. So if I give you some example of how we've used AI, particularly within our business. So as an example, there is lots of communication that has to take place with brokers throughout a policy lifecycle. So lots of administration that has to go on, dialogue backwards and forwards. We've been able to deploy AI to expedite some of that communication, automate some of that communication rather than having to be done by a person. So generating contextual conversations with brokers to update them, for example, on a renewal that might be due and what's changed about that renewal that they might need to be aware of. That's one really good use case. We've been deploying AI to assist our underwriters. So where quotations need to go to an underwriter for review, how can AI be used to make really intelligent suggestions as to the actions that an underwriter should take? So we gain consistency within our underwriting ecosystem, and we shortcut the amount of time that underwriters need to spend assessing data, and they can more quickly get to decision points. Another area that we've been pioneering over the last 12 months is the ability to extract data from unstructured data sources and using AI to then contextualize that data and make that usable within our platform. So, for example, brokers can send us Word documents or PDF documents of their policy submissions. We can extract that data and intelligently use it within our platform. So none of those things started with the technology. They all started with, there's a problem here that we need to solve. How can technology be used to solve that? And AI has been a big component of how we've solved those particular business issues.
Great. There's some really practical applications there of kind of AI and a good benefit to you in terms of obviously accelerating business processes and making them more intelligent. Given you've, as you said at the start, you've built from the ground up, you've had an advantage, right? That you've not been hampered by any kind of legacy. I was just going to bring Fifi in, I think, just to give a perspective from other potentially more established organizations, because clearly the benefit to C-Quence is probably going to be the benefit to other insurers. But like, Fifi, in your experience, like, kind of how does that translate into the world where you were working?
Yeah, so I think I've had opportunity to work for two different organizations that had legacy systems within the insurance ecosystem. So Direct Line, if you take Direct Line, for example, it has multiple product lines, and all the product lines will be running on different systems. I think there was a transformation project to try and collate all of that onto one policy admin system or claim system, but that's quite a big project. And then you have to handle the data and all the transformation and produce all the reporting. But I think a lot of the time, and I guess luckily I've also had the opportunity to work from a startup where we kind of build everything from scratch. It is a lot easier to build from scratch because you're not dealing with legacy. You can then design your architecture. You can design how the teams work together. You can design how you want to leverage technology, data, and AI. Whereas if you're a large organization which is already been established, that is not the case. So I think you have to be a little bit smart about it. You can't just solve the whole world in one day. You're going to have lots of data quality issues. There's going to be other things that might be blockers to trying to achieve that. So you need to figure out how do you start? And that's really the key $1 billion question. How do you actually get started and show some value? Because once you get started and show some value, things will just fall down and then you almost create a chain effect or domino effect where things will just fall into place. So probably I think there were some use cases that Elliot mentioned that we've done a very similar approach. So in claims, for example, we had unstructured data, and similarly, we started with the outcome. We wanted to understand how other garages or the third parties were charging us for invoices. Now, this data is stored in PDF files. There's no way to analyze that. There's no way to even get that information. So using AI and building a process to extract that enables them, all right, firstly, now we have the data. So how does that compare to the market? How does that compare internally? And then we can go forth and make those decisions. Now, this project was a catalyst that enabled the business areas or the claims directors to kind of get a view of, we can literally leverage AI and we can make better informed decisions. What other use cases can we go about and do? Whereas initially when you start the conversation, there's a lot of legacy, there's a lot of things not in place. But once you crack that first project, it opens the door. So my advice to anyone listening who's in a legacy or a big organization, I'll say just start small. Don't try and solve the whole problem or the whole world. Find a use case that's really tangible outcome that you can really talk about and evangelize around the business, and that will really get things into motion.
That's great. Thanks, Vicky. That's a really interesting insight. And I think the bit around starting small and kind of getting going and gaining momentum is really important. How can you evidence to the wider stakeholders that you're making traction and it's worth investing in this? There was something I wanted that I think is a great segue, right? Because the next thing I was going to talk about was this need for kind of data foundations and having things in the right order. And quite often we hear the term garbage in, garbage out. And I was really keen to get the view of kind of the panel of like, how much do you believe in that? Is that true? How can you get started with AI without solving all the foundational problems? And I was going to actually lean on you, Gareth. I know because I hear it quite a bit sometimes in conversations I have, but from your experience and kind of being at the sort of services forefront, what's your view on that statement of, sort your data foundations, garbage in, garbage out, AI, you can't tackle it until you've got it sorted?
Yeah, I mean, it is the age-old kind of adage, isn't it? And I do think there's definitely truth in it. So the same in AI solutions as with any data-driven solution is that if you feed it the wrong, it will give you the wrong answers back. I think one maybe misstep that people make is that thinking that they have to fix the whole foundation before they start to build any use case, and I think that's a bit of a misnomer as well. I think it's naturally more beneficial to start to try to yield the value as quickly as possible, to use the data that does support effective use cases, and build those initial use cases, like Fifi was saying, to deliver the value early to get people enthusiastic and bought in. Once the value starts being delivered, then you can incrementally improve your data platform, your data sort of quality, your master data kind of or reference data systems as you go through it. I think Elliot's probably taken that approach where he's identified those use cases where the data does support the value delivery, and at the same time probably identifying the use cases that maybe aren't yet possible because the data isn't there or the quality isn't sufficiently high to support the use case. The good thing, I suppose, with AI is that it can help you to get that data out of the unstructured data sets, like Elliot was already talking about, extracting information from the broker data, from the broker documents. That's a really good use case for AI, where you say you don't have to rely on sort of the old approach was sort of regular expression usage to extract information from text, but there's so many limitations to that, and you build these massive code bases to try to extract information because they don't have that same semantic kind of capability or contextual information that the LLMs can extract. So there's advantages there, and I think that AI can help you to solve that problem. But I'd say look for those high value use cases where you can deliver based on the data you've got that is good enough quality. use AI to extract other data that is, will be useful for other use cases. And as Fifi said, just start, get going. If we think a few years down the line, AI is going to be all over our businesses. So I think beginning, and if it's not, we're probably falling behind. So, getting started, the most important thing.
Okay, well, and Martin, I'll go pull you in actually. I think that what Gareth just talked about is probably applicable across industries, right? It's not insurance. I think we're into kind of a segue here of generally how do you approach kind of AI, but from a Clyde Co, you've been in insurance, you've been around it, and from the legal aspect, how are you seeing this kind of transition across, and what's your view around kind of getting started and making the most as a partner, I guess, to insurance firms?
So I think just leaning back into the question of and the bridging piece there was the question of the legacy issues that we deal with in business. I guess the technical debt, and that debt is new. The debt is now as ubiquitous as the potential for the technology. And what I mean by that is that whereas before the technical debt may have been just our legacy systems, when we're trying to bring in a new piece of, a new application, the ability for that application to talk to another application is difficult. This is now much more pervasive than that. We've got technical debt in our data, and whilst Gareth says is that there's the small niche use cases that people are identifying is that we could lean into some pockets of data in order to extract some value from that. The potential for AI and the ambition that organizations have for AI is for this to be a general purpose application. And for that, you're going to have to understand the levels of debt that you have in your organization. So there is, I think, a review that we all have to do, and across many industries, of the data assets that we have, the processes that we work by, the skills and that people have within the organizations are all going to have to be revised and updated. I think I look at AI and the recent developments in AI as being the technology of tomorrow, but we're still trying to apply it to the problems and the ways of working of today. And unless we're prepared to, I think, go through data transformation 2.0 and look at not just what our information and data is, but actually that's the taxonomical approach towards data. What's the ontological approach towards data that we need to have? Not only do we have to understand what the data is, but we now have to understand how our data relates to itself and to other data sets in the organization. We have to look at how skilled our people are. A lot of things are coming out at the minute about the way in which people are approaching the technology. I mean, in law, just an awful lot of analysis being done at the minute about people using fabricated case law being sort of summoned by ChatGPT and then being produced in court, for example. It creates all sorts of risks in relation to this. But you've also got where are we going with this technology and where are we going with our organizations, to the extent that the Pope is now leaning in to the debate about where we should be taking our application of this technology and what we want it to do. So I don't think that this is easy. Fundamentally, what we're arriving at is that prediction is cheaper than it ever has been before. The question is what we're going to do with all the prediction that we now have available to us. And I think it's an opportunity to rethink the way we use this technology and we think about our businesses.
I think that's a really interesting point when you focus in on that kind of transformation 2.0 and the journey we're going on, and then how we use the output. It is really important to understand how you're going to use these advancing technology to drive value. Something you mentioned you went through was how I don't use these words, but kind of setting ourselves up for success and changing the way it works. You talked about technical debt, but you also touched on culture and skills.
Yes.
But how do you see that evolving from a team perspective and don't know the consulting speak operating model, but like how a business functions, that culture inside to be successful? What are you seeing in that space?
I'm seeing still a mindset that we have to teach people how to use a specific technology or application, right? It's kind of the old way of delivering IT training, for example, or any other technical skill training. I don't think that this is a technology that we have to worry too much about kind of instructing people how to use it, right? This isn't about teaching people a programming code like Python or what have you, because fundamentally this is about technology that's responding to natural language. What we have to do is actually go a level up here and teach people about the difference between deterministic technology and probabilistic technology. And what I mean by that is that throughout human history, our machines have done what we always wanted them to do, right? It would, and we'd know if a machine wasn't doing the thing we wanted it to do. If the machine was, to wrap something in cellophane and it was not wrapping it in cellophane, it would be obvious to us that it wasn't working. Now, however, our machines are kidding us, right? It's producing an output, regardless of whether it's right or wrong. And studies like that have been done by Stanford University, for example, showed us that the problem wasn't that insofar as hallucinations, the problem was that the hallucinations were so convincing that we weren't able to distinguish whether or not there was a hallucination there. And that, when I go back to looking at how lawyers are getting this wrong, because they're assuming that the output is reasonable and right because it sounds convincing enough, and therefore they're going with it, and they're going with all the risk that entails. Now, from an insurance perspective, that's there is all manner of issues about how we deploy this technology. Insurers have also got to think about how they underwrite the risks associated with this technology. And I mean, it becomes a pervasive problem. It's not just a problem for them and themselves in their own use. It's a problem with everybody's use, for example.
Certainly, often making the segue from people to model trust and then underwriting the risk is definitely the journey. I think it's really interesting you said it. It's about lifting it up to focus on upskilling everybody not to use the tech but to understand how to interpret it. Kind of, Elliot, got to circle back around to you, because you said at the start you've got applications and you've been driving down this route of driving the business from a data and AI standpoint. What risk consideration or risk profiling and awareness of this inherent kind of trust and ethical and bias and hallucinations, how have you tackled that as a business?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I would answer that in many ways. It's the same as I personally would approach any new technology, and I think it's these same questions have been asked multiple times over the years in terms of how might we approach moving all our data to the cloud, as an example, and all the challenges of that rate. I think you have to have a sort of skeptical inquisitiveness. I do think there is some relearning from our people. Certainly my experience is helping people understand what the tools are really good at, what they're not so good at, where they need to be more mindful of what they're seeing and whether they can trust that or not. And I think any organization that's adopting this kind of technology responsibly is going to start to look for some of the lower risk use cases where they can build trust, not both from a technical perspective, but also from a business perspective. So I'll give you that example where we might be using AI to make recommendations to an underwriter as to the actions they should take to underwrite a particular set of referrals that they've seen come in. We're never going to move straight to a point where the system is doing those underwriting referrals for them. There is always going to be that element of eyes on initially where we can validate what we're seeing. Is it reasonable? Is it not reasonable? We can have scoring mechanisms to say, did the underwriter take that action or did they not take that action? If they did take that action, can we upweight the prominence and relevance of that particular recommendation? So I think the human in the loop bit is really important to build trust, to build advocacy, and to build an understanding of what the technology is really good at and where it's not. I do think as our understanding of the technology evolves and as our adoption of the technology evolves, it gives us a bit more confidence to go responsibly into areas that would have been deemed more high risk. But I do think before we get anywhere near, I know there's lots of talk in the industry about AI replacing actuaries and replacing underwriters. I just think we are a way off that yet, no matter what anyone might predict, because I think there's a real role for this AI technology augmenting what humans are really good at and bringing efficiencies to the table. I don't think we need to go to that nth degree yet, and I don't think necessarily that will be the ultimate outcome. And I think it's quite. I guess it gets headlines, but in my mind, it's just unnecessary scaremongering. I think there's a lot that we can deliver in terms of value that is in a relatively safe space, that drives efficiencies, that improves customer outcomes, that reduces operating costs. There's so much to go at. Why don't we focus on those things rather than on the really big, scary stuff that we can't wrap our heads around? But that's my view.
Can I just build on that slightly, just a second?
Yeah.
Just the economics of AI, in my mind. I talked before about the fact that prediction is now cheaper than it ever has been. As a consequence, there's more prediction now than there ever has been as well, and that the complement or the output of predictions is the judgment that needs then to assess the prediction. We got ourselves very quickly into the mindset that AI will come along and be able to drive the cost of a job down to its lowest common denominator, effectively take to build on Elliot's point there, to take the skills of experienced people and be able to put that capability in the hands of cheaper, less experienced people. And I think actually the flip side or the other side of this is the truth, in that what we're doing now is that we're creating the need for expertise like we never have before. And then the first phase of this is that actually those experts that we thought that this technology would replace become more important and more valuable to any organization than they ever have done before.
I think that's a really key point. I was going to bring Fifi, I was going to bring you in, because I think there's, again, the contrast of building from the ground up that Elliot, you're talking about in C-Quence. And I think that bit about that Martin just said around elevating the need for expertise to sit on top of the model kind of automated intelligence that really provides that expertise and makes a differentiating decision. Were you seeing that at Direct Line Group, for example, like in the more legacy environment? Is it the same principles, or is there a different approach?
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting, because I think that what we're there's a few different things at play here. And I think first I wanted to kind of circle back on one of the things we talked about, which is about building using AI, which is a technology for tomorrow for problems of today. I think, Martin, you said that, and I think that's a really good point, because I do find that a lot of companies' architectural technology, the way it's set up, isn't geared towards the leveraging the full capabilities of AI, in particular Gen AI. So that's a first issue. Now, what you've talked about in terms of the skilled workforce you have and how do you empower them? How do you remove bottlenecking processes? For instance, if an underwriter wants to make a change in a particular asset class and change a premium, whatever it is, currently the process can take up to 4 to 8 weeks, and just depend on all the different processes it can go through. Now, agentic AI can build processes that can reduce that to maybe a couple of days. Now, there's some risk involved in that, but this is one of the ways where you're still getting productivity. You're not necessarily replacing the underwriter, but you're trying to find out what are the bottlenecks in the work that they do, and how can we use AI to speed that up. And that's how you can really leverage that. And there's a lot of companies that really like looking at use cases like that. Like, how do we augment what their skilled workforce are already doing and trying to speed them up? I've had personal experience with this. I've been using Copilot for coding and solving some of the problems I have at the moment. And I think for the first few days I was blindly copy and pasting, and sometimes it would be working. And I actually noticed there was a lot of errors that was popping up, and sometimes it would work, but it wasn't as efficient. So now I've started to be very critical of what Copilot is producing. And there's some questions where I actually don't ask Copilot. I just go straight to Google, because I just know it's not going to get there. Give me the right response that I want. And I think that having the expert then know what the answer should be like, then allows them to question it as they kind of use it. And I think someone else made the point that as we are using this technology, we develop the criticalness to actually ask those key questions. Is this giving me the right answer that I want, rather than just blindly following it? So I think some organizations with legacy might be taking on tasks like this and trying to figure out from the workforce, not necessarily reducing it, but how do we speed up some of our archaic processes that we have, and how can we use AI to leverage that? Yeah.
Okay, so something you mentioned there just triggered a thought, which is kind of a question I'll pose to everybody, and jump in if you want to answer. But this point of having, like Martin, raising the bar up and needing the expertise to sit on top of the intelligence, as the kind of new workforce are entering, clearly, historically, people in the position of experts have gained that by going through, doing it themselves, having to put in some, work the hard yards, right, to gain that experience and learn. If without that step, do you see there being an issue in the future? How do we keep creating experts in something if they don't have the ground roots hand-on experience, grassroots, sorry, hand-on experience?
That I do see as a fundamental challenge, and one which, in the excitement of the technology, we're not addressing our minds to yet. The best example I can give you at the moment is I described to a senior lawyer in a law firm that the role of giving a task, delegating a task to, say, a trainee, you delegate the task would come back, and it will, there'll be errors, there'll be issues wrong. You'd correct it. You'd send it back for work to be done again, or with some further guidance, etc. And then eventually get it back, and and it still wouldn't be right. And then in the deadline approaching, you'd end up just doing the job yourself anyway, right? And that was a sort of a frustration of a senior lawyer. That frustration aside, that's still part of the learning curve that you are applying. You're passing that knowledge back into your organization, and that time taken, that extra time that maybe would have been quicker just to do the job yourself, but at the very least, what's happening is that time is going, that effort is going back into an investment in skills and knowledge in your business. Now you replace the trainee with a AI solution like ChatGPT, for example, and you're prompting it, it's coming back with hallucinations, so you're re-prompting it and guiding it, and it's still not quite answering it right, so you do it yourself anyway. All that you've done now as an organization is that you've invested knowledge and skills and time in training OpenAI's model for it. So that there's been a kind of a knowledge, that you haven't saved any more time. The frustration in executing the task is still there in terms of the time taken, but you're now passing your knowledge into another organization and not your own. And that future skill set is not being developed either. And I don't think we're thinking carefully about the way in which we're deploying the technology, because we're still trying to, repeat the same thing I made that Fifi just said, which is we're applying the technology to the, to our earth of tomorrow, to the ways that we work today. And as a consequence, we're doing damage to the ways in which we're, to our organizations, because we're not being thoughtful and mindful about that thing that we need to make sure is always there, which is the thing that differentiates us. As an organization, we all use a GPT model or some other model from a small number of large language model providers. Then we all end up basically becoming a vanilla version of a language model out to our customer base, whatever that is, and we end up losing the thing that provides us with market differentiation and value provision to our customers. So we have to think very carefully about the way in which we drive this technology into the business. I don't think it's achieving the efficiency gains that we expected at this stage, because we're not mindful about the way in which we're deploying it. It's creating different problems in that efficiency gain, and we're not then doing something that we used to always do, which is pass on our knowledge. So there's a lot of thought still to do.
If I can come in on that, that last part I think is probably worth coming back to maybe in a minute, about sort of how we make sure we are driving value. But I'll give a slightly different view, I think, to the whole skills piece. And I don't know, maybe it's controversial, but the way I see it is, if I look back in my career, how people were coding 20 years ago versus the languages and the tools and the techniques they're using now, they're very different. Is there any less of a market for software developers now? No, there's not. It's just different. Very few people write machine code anymore, because we've abstracted that into languages that are more accessible, more understandable. If I think about engineering, now a lot of our infrastructure's moved to the cloud, so there are less people putting machines in racks and coding up routers, etc., because we can do that now through software. So the problem that we're experiencing and grappling with AI is not, in my opinion, a particularly new problem. It's always been there through the evolution of technology and how we adopt that technology. And I think skills do adapt and they do change as we understand the value that that technology can bring and what we need to do as humans to leverage that technology to create value. So I don't know, maybe I'll be proved wrong in years to come, but I don't have a particular worry about, particularly in the technical world, the knowledge gap creating, because I think our knowledge will just be different and we'll use those tools in different ways in the same way that we've evolved with our approach to software development or hardware engineering. I think the challenge in the business area is you still need skilled, experienced people to be able to underwrite risk, because regardless of the technology you're using, that knowledge of what's good underwriting and what's bad underwriting has to come from it. It has to emanate from someone. It has to be validated from, by somebody, not least because we're in a regulated industry that requires that level of audit and that sort of custody chain of decision making. So I think the challenge is perhaps on the business side, how do we make sure we maintain those skills? But from a technical perspective, we've always seen an evolution and a change in skills, and there's always been that worry that it will erode jobs potentially or skills, but they just adapt and change.
Yeah, I would be of that same kind of mindset as you, Elliot. I think that if we look at the sort of the career trajectory of a senior underwriter or lawyer, and the journey that they went on historically in order to get to the level that they're at, I think that the starting point just changes somewhat, in that the tools available to the juniors are different than the tools that were available before, and so they delegate more of the repetitive tasks or specific types of tasks to the AIs. So I do think that the roles will change. I don't know if they'll be superseded. I do agree with Martin that there's a risk that the AIs can become a bit of an echo chamber, right? So the AIs themselves, the limit of the new information that's available to them to train them is going to be perhaps a limitation. So I think that's where also the human input remains being quite important. If we do take it a bit more to the extreme, though, and we think about the number of tasks that we think we will be able to delegate to an AI at a certain point, in the future, if we think 5 years down the line or 10 years down the line, and we at the same time think about how careers have evolved historically up to this point, I think we are still underestimating the potential for a significant shift in how careers evolve, right? Because I think that the technology moving that quickly means that the individuals who are carrying out the role, the tools available to them will change quite rapidly. And so maybe one of the risks is our ability to keep up with the pace of change as individuals within a career. And so that, I think, is maybe a bit more of a challenge that people might face, is that their careers are changing so quickly and the technology available to them are changing so quickly that it reduces the gap between the senior and the junior, because the junior tooled up with the additional tools that arrive over the course of 5 years might be such that they can perform at the level of a senior much more quickly.
The education process then is one about creating people with skills rather than people with knowledge.
Agreed.
Because
the ability to learn, I think the ability to learn and that inquisitiveness, I think, is really key. And I think that's going to be one of the most critical skills. I mean, my daughter's at an age now where she's starting her career, and I've always said to her, the most important thing is your ability to learn, not necessarily the knowledge that you have. And I think that rings true today more than it ever has done, that the pace of change does get quicker, and therefore your ability to adapt and learn is more important than any acquired knowledge that you previously had.
And I think that, oh, sorry, go on, Fifi. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to give my point on this as well, because I think everyone shared their point about just the skills gap and how AI is going to kind of bridge that. I think I do agree that people on the junior side will be moving to senior more quickly, and I think that we've just hit the nail on the head about the critical thinking and being able to critically think about what the actual problem is, rather than what is the technology or what is the code you need to write to solve it. And I think that's one thing I've actually noticed when I see juniors using LLMs to help with the code and help with the business problems of what they're trying to solve. I think what experience gives you is knowing the right question to ask. In this case, that would be the prompt. And I think that that is a difference between spending 30 minutes prompting to try and get the right answer or 5 minutes prompting. And I think that's what you gain from experience, is about having solved multiple problems and knowing the right questions to ask. And I think that's just something you can probably learn, but it's also something you derive from having experience with solving that problems or that problems in a multitude of areas multiple times. And I don't know whether AI can bridge that gap or not, but I think we'll find out in a few years' time. So that's my little anecdote on that one.
I think the AI bridging the gap is the bridging the knowledge gap. I think it's making knowledge accessible. If I think back to a law degree, what you came out with was the foundations of the foundational subtopics in that every lawyer will need. The bit above that, which is the kind of the knowledge of a specific area, is going to be less necessary. Get your foundations in within insurance or foundations or legal foundations or whatever they are, or coding foundations, how to actually build code, for instance, and to solve problems and engineer a solution rather than the coding. And then above that, critical thinking and skills. We're moving to that, but I think the foundations will continue to need to exist. We've probably laboured this point too long, Tom.
No, I think it's I think it's a really interesting discussion. I think it's something that, the interesting topics of discussion are ones that you can't easily solve. And this is definitely a future leaders problem, right? If you tackle it, I think there's something you guys mentioned around the pace of change and keeping up with that, and from a skills perspective. But I was just going to lean on that point and ask a slightly different question. So given the rate of change, and in the last 18 months, maybe it's 2 years now, but like the explosion of ChatGPT, the kind of embedding of LLMs in the business, the move to agentic AI, but there's got to be a question, and I hear people say this sometimes: how do I know I'm making the right decision now with the tech choices I'm making for the business? And I was in a conversation last week which was centered around buy versus build, and I think there's a question in that which is maybe more in the here and now. And I don't think we can solve it, but I'd be really interested to get the views of everybody on how do you know you're making the right decision in the tech choices you're making now to solve your business problem, and maybe in the lens of that buy versus build, how do you kind of strategic decisions of what you're doing as a business? Actually, who hasn't spoken? Okay, Gareth, you were in this chat with me, but why don't you just kick off?
I can kick it off. Yeah, I can kick it off a little bit, maybe. So the answer is you don't know if you're making the right decision or not, very simply. And so you have to define your strategy with principles that allow you to make the mistakes and change things out later. That's the most important thing. So make sure that you build, an ecosystem of solutions which are, modular, and you can change them out, because you will make mistakes. I think that's the first thing. The second thing is that lots of kind of principles or sort of patterns for design are coming out, which are designed to be interoperable and open. I think that's a good kind of assumption you should make, is that you're going to have loads of AI solutions across your organizations. They should be able to interoperate with each other. If you follow design principles that allow that interoperability, that's going to be really advantageous. The buy versus build is a really interesting one, because you sort of think, oh, well, I don't want to build every single one of these individual applications, but equally, I don't want to have a list of vendors, as long as, my arm, or what, which will be really difficult to manage, and the cost associated will be really high. So there is this balance you want to strike in buy versus build as well. I think that we're going to invariably end up with the same blend of technologies, richness of the blend of technologies we have right now. We buy some things, we build some things. Some things people subscribe to on their own. Some things are provided by the enterprise. AI will just become embedded inside of all of those applications. If we begin with that assumption, then we kind of can follow down the next step in the line as well. How then do I govern it? How do I manage it? How do I enable people to use it effectively and safely? And you sort of follow that route of mistakes will be made, but how do we reduce and mitigate the risk of those mistakes being made? When we're buying technology, how do we select things that don't tie us into a single format or tool set or whatever it is, that we somehow remain open to kind of interchanging things? For a while there, we looked at the number of organizations that were producing LLMs was increasing significantly, and a lot of LLMs were becoming available, and you don't want to buy a platform where you're tied into one LLM. for example, right? Because, or even one family of LLMs, because they're not all great at everything. So, being able to switch out the models underneath is important. And then I think the other thing that came up for us, Tom, the other day was this sovereignty risk or issue. So in regulated industries where data sovereignty is important, where does the model reside, and what is the sort of impact from a data sovereignty perspective of that model residing in a data center which is not in within your sovereign boundaries? So I think there's no answer there, except that there is no real answer, except that you want to design a strategy that allows you to change out components as you go. Yeah.
Okay. So principle of trying to build in flexibility and not lock yourself in is correct. Martin, I don't know if you were going to say something before. Sorry.
Yeah, I think for me there are two fundamental areas. One is the pace of change is going to be significant, and it's not going to stop, right? And so I think that you have to re-engineer your business, not to be able to take yourself through one change or transformation journey and then think that you've got from start to finish and that's your job done. That'll be you for another 5 years. I think you've got to be able to move your organization of whatever size it is, of how many people there are, to one which is going to be permanently change ready and able to iterate and adapt for the future on an ongoing basis. And secondly, alongside of that, you have to focus on your fundamentals of your business, the bit that gives you, what is it that gives you competitive advantage and market differentiation, and focus on that and make sure that is going to be ready. So we talk about every organization that becomes a vanilla version of just a GPT model, and therefore, what is your differentiation? Differentiation is going to become your knowledge base, and the differentiation is going to become your people. And I think that those are two areas of distinct differentiation that we should be focusing on. Certainly that's the way I think in a service industry like law, you end up trying to focus. The insurance, I think it becomes very, very, I don't think it becomes too dissimilar. You're looking at your knowledge assets, your data, making sure that you don't give that away in exchange for the technology is going to be really key.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. The thing you touched on, you touched it a few times. We never really picked it up, this differentiation factor. And if everybody's making advances in AI and adopting the same LLMs, how do you differentiate? And is there a risk that everybody's got the same vanilla solution? I just kind of loop back on it, but not focus on that point. But Elliot, you talked earlier, so we'll come back to it. I think we should do kind of value realization, right? But the reason we're doing all of this, the reason we're having this conversation is that people want to get value from the advances in technology. But I guess we're going to throw that out there without any specific question, but what does it mean to you, value, and how are you focused on driving that?
I think there's a really big question here that we have to grapple with, which is if you think about how much technology has advanced over the last, let's say, 20 years, do we fundamentally as consumers feel like we experience better or worse service from, for example, the insurance industry? And I reckon if we did a poll, we might be, and maybe not surprised, but we might be quite disappointed with the answers that we get in terms of what people's perception are of insurance, both as a consumer, maybe as a broker in a B2B environment where they're dealing with insurers. Do we feel like the world is becoming better or not with the advancement of this technology? And I think the challenge is that we're not making the strides that we should be. And that is because often we're focused on the wrong things, we're deploying technology to solve the wrong problems, or we're not deploying technology effectively. And we're forgetting that actually solving the problems is as much about people and process as it is about the technology. And therefore, we're making decisions that might make sense on a spreadsheet because I can reduce the cost of X from, A to B, but I'm not thinking about the consumer impact and whether I'm actually building advocacy in my brand and whether I'm actually helping people gain a better experience of interacting with me. And I think we're not talking about this enough. We're not challenging ourselves enough to say, is the actual outcome for the end consumer, which is ultimately why we're here, better or worse as a result? And I think there are examples where you could probably say, yes, it's been great. But as an example, last year I got hit by someone in my car hit and run, they drove off. The claims experience, the experience of dealing with that insurer was absolutely appalling. And as someone that's worked in the industry, it just enraged me how inefficient the process was. Yet this is an organization that externally would talk a lot about how they've invested in technology, how they've invested in a claims process that is second to none. Yet the process fundamentally and the people operating it weren't given the tools to do a good job. And I really think we have to constantly come back and say, why are we doing the things that we're doing? If we're deploying a piece of technology, if we're deploying a piece of AI, what is the outcome on the end user, whether that be a business user or an end consumer, and is it making their lives better? Because if it's not, then you're kind of missing the point of why we're in business and sort of serving the customers, assuming that if you do the right thing by the customer, whoever that customer group may be, then that's going to build value in your business and your brand. So I would definitely challenge us that we should place more focus on driving value than we actually are.
Yeah, if I can just add, just to add to that, I think that I've been in certain organizations where they've placed more value on deploying AI than solving business problems. And I think that's where we get into a real problem, because AI, or Gen AI in particular, is quite shiny. Everyone's talking about it. If your CEOs ask you, why do we not have any LMs deployed, you need to have a question or an answer for it. And I think the CDOs or CTOs are in a very, at the moment, it's just easy to get funding for it. It's easy to talk about it. A lot of people have access to AI. So the questions or the pressures to just show that you're doing something is actually sometimes, I think, negating the actual the thinking process you go about to find real use cases that add in value. And I think that also kind of ties into the build versus buy, because some organizations, you might have the resources to show value very quickly. So if you buy something off the shelf, they can actually help you to get there very quickly, then that really helps you. But I think that, the value question is, I think, to get more people to buy into AI in terms of actually on an enterprise level and seeing value from it, you actually have to be able to deploy something of value very quickly. And that shows that actually you understand what you're doing, and you can actually demonstrate how it's helping the business and the end customer, as earlier said.
I think I'd agree with that. And just one other comment. I think the best way to get people to buy into AI is that they feel like they're not buying into AI. They're buying into the solution that they're getting, and the AI is just a part of the delivery. I don't buy into, I don't know, a tire. I buy into the ability to travel from one place to another. In terms of my car. So
yeah, I agree with that.
And Martin made a really good, important point earlier, which I think ties back to this value conversation, is that we're not just trying to take existing processes and make them a little bit better. The opportunity is much bigger than that now. So we can really look at redesigning the process. The opportunity for the value for value out of these solutions is much more significant, because of if we look at it from a whole process re-engineering perspective and say, I don't have to be limited by the historic process because that was designed with a specific kind of stepwise, human in the loop, or fully human executed originally, probably sort of process. And actually, if we get creative, we can probably get more value out of the solutions. And when you think about consumer products, that's kind of a bit easier. But I think when you look at just internal process re-engineering within large organizations, that's that's a real opportunity. Finding those super high value areas and then re-engineering the process associated with them.
Yeah, sorry, I was just checking the Q&A, but I think you're right. What's fascinating is opening. It's almost like it's by design. Opening up, like, with what the opportunities, and we're kind of looping around to what are the opportunities and how do we get started. I think that's probably one of the key points here, like you said, Gareth, around the ability to transform the business and leverage the technology in a way that allows you to do something fundamentally different, to what Elliot said, to elevate the impact you have with your customer base, because that's the ultimate goal, right? We're trying to improve how we do things. I think we've got probably a few minutes left, so we'll wrap up shortly. But I guess that kind of hits the crux of the question. How do you know if you're doing the right things? What are the right things to choose? And maybe just a quick sweep before we wrap up. Like, has anyone got, in the experience you guys have had kind of tackling this and approaching it, like, how do you choose the right place to start that's going to have the most impact and drive this elevated value?
I think from our experience is, you've got to listen to your users, your consumers, or your internal users, depending on who that audience is, and really understand what their problems are, and really dig into that. Like we talk a lot about spending more time understanding the problem than necessarily focusing on the solution. Like really making sure that we've understood that we're solving the right problem is key, because often what you're told first isn't actually the problem. You've got to dig into it, you've got to peel back the layers, really get to the crux of the issue. I think if you can spend the time doing that, then you can start to look at the solutions to those problems and understand whether AI plays a role within that solution, or whether it is more traditional technology or process re-engineering, or a combination of all of those things. Then I think you have the embryo of something that can be really value additive back in the business. I think there is then that need to be exploratory, to allow a little bit of experimentation, to learn. I think with the adoption of some of these technologies, you're not going to get it right the first time, so you've got to be able to have that trial and error component to your design and to your solution. But I think the most important thing is making a start and doing something and learning from it. It's more important to do that than it is to sort of try and wait until you've got everything perfect, because you never will.
I think one thing from my experience that really helped is that so one of the companies I worked in that was head of data science, I partnered up with the director of claims, and essentially we had weekly meetings where it was a steerco format, and we'll talk about all the business problems they had, and we could kind of go through from a business perspective what is important to them, what is really going to move their dial in terms of reducing indemnity costs, essentially cost of claims. And when we figure those out, then we kind of did more workshops to figure out what are the areas, what are the pain points. And I really agree with everything Elliot said. Like, what they tell you at the start might not always be the case once you've done a bit more discovery work. And I think based on that, you really find out areas, actually, if we're able to solve this for them, this will reduce costs by 20, 30%. All right, cool. That's what we tackle first. Now, does that actually require AI, or what is the solution that is required from that? But I'm a really big believer in partnership, because I think that and it goes back to the culture and organization design and all kind of stuff. If you have an AI team that's sitting somewhere completely isolated away from the business, there's no way you're going to understand the business problems in depth enough to really figure out what is the outcome, and also being outcome driven. What is the outcome you're trying to achieve, and then what's the best way of doing that? And I think you'll get that when you work in partnership with the business.
Excellent.
And I'd say one other thing is talk to your CFO, right? Because your CFO will know exactly where all of the money is coming from and all the money is going from. So they will know where the big levers are. And I think that's also they're probably useful to get their buy-in anyway, because they're probably providing the money. But I think it is valuable to chat with somebody who can see actually the metrics of the business, because then you can see the big items. I mean, people use methodologies like value chain mapping to sort of drill down further into the details. But I do think that it's a good place to start.
And Martin, is that what's your experience been?
So I think this is I think don't allocate the problem to a single functional department. This is a multidisciplinary problem and requires a multidisciplinary approach. You need to take your people, your process, your technology stack with you, the foundations in terms of your data, the value back to your customer base. It's a whole organization problem, and I think that you need to socialize the approach to developing a solution as wide as you can.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, don't solve the problem in a silo, right? There's more to it. Okay, we are approaching the top of the hour, so I think it's probably time to call time. So obviously, first off, thank you everybody. Thank you guys for joining. Thank you for speaking, Elliot, Fifi, Martin, Gareth. I am going to give you all a chance to give your key kind of takeaway you might want to share with the audience. It doesn't matter if you all repeat the same thing, but if there's one thing you want people to kind of think about when they leave this or learn from an experience you've got, please share it in a second. Just before that, I mentioned at the start, there's going to be a face-to-face event we're going to run. I think we're aiming the 24th of June to run this event, where we're going to have a kind of interactive, hands-on, kind of diving into practicalities of AI and how you can identify opportunities, and try to get the people who attend that to leave with some practical next steps they can take to really start embedding it in a business. So more interactive from a kind of audience participation point than this. We'll send a link round after to everyone that's joined. Please register if you're interested, and we'll get in touch to to do that. It should be a really exciting event, and hopefully it'll help people who are keen to make strides be able to get started. But to wrap up, and I'll just kind of call on people, go around. Like Elliot, you kicked us off before. Do you want to give your kind of 10-15 second pitch on what people should take away?
Yeah, I think start with the problem. Make sure you understand the problem. Make a start. Don't procrastinate. I think starting and learning is key. And be willing to experiment and to learn. I think they're the key things I would say to take away from this.
Excellent. Thank you. I was going to go around my screen. Gareth, you're next on my screen. Do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, be creative, be imaginative. I think that don't be too constrained by what you think AI can and can't do. Like everyone's been saying, like, try to solve the problem. And if AI can help you, I'm sure it can, then that's great. But be creative in how you would think about addressing a problem.
Excellent. Martin?
Focus on value and enable as many people in your organization to deliver that and create that value for you.
Super. And last but not least, Fifi.
Yeah, I think everyone said what I was going to say, but one thing that comes to mind is be curious about AI. And I think that there's a lot of potential out there. And I think curiosity will lead you to explore, and exploration will lead you to find potential solutions for your organization.
Super. So just going to say thank you again. We will call time, but thank you ever so much for your time, gentlemen. It's been a privilege hosting, and we've covered so much. So thank you very much.
No problem. Thank you.
Thanks.
Take care.
Very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.